You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Steven Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and this is an instant overreaction of early signing day. Tomorrow, we also do a review of signing day on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, so everybody tune in for that. But we're going to overreact a little bit tonight. And tonight is interesting because I brought up that Ole Miss is finally recruiting high school ranks at the same level or close to it, at least, to what they were doing with the transfer portal before. It's not a sea change of what's going on. Ole Miss needs to replace 50 players. So high school recruiting is going to have more influence than it normally has because Ole Miss has so many players that they have to replace. So Ole Miss signing 23, 24 players out of the high school rank and looking more like a normal class is nothing to shake a stick at. But Ole Miss, out of 23, I think it was, let's see how many blue chips they had. 52% of this class were blue chips. Everybody that wants to talk about the blue chip ratio of high school recruiting, 52% are 4- and 5-star players. And if we look at the class that Ole Miss brought in, leading with Caleb Cunningham and Winston Watkins and Devin Harper and Shakai Mills-Knight, there are a lot of extremely impactful players that Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss staff were able to recruit. And that is put Ole Miss at a different level. It's not the fact necessarily that the numbers are higher than they normally are. It's the fact that they're hitting on much more at a higher level than they were before. And before, maybe they were having to go a little bit more into the transfer portal because they weren't getting a Caleb Cunningham. They weren't getting a Devin Harper. They weren't getting a Shakai Mills-Knight. And because of that, Ole Miss has been pretty successful in the high school ranks this time. All right, so looking at the class as a whole, let me bring up the screen real quick to see what's going on here. This is the recruiting class that Ole Miss just signed, and we're going to break them down individually a little bit in a second in the second and third segments. The third segment, I think we're going to spend transfer portal and take your comments. If you're commenting on the show, please put where you're commenting from so we can talk about that as well. When you look at Caleb Cunningham, he's pretty much a consensus top 5-star player. He's the consensus number 21 player in the country. He's the consensus number 3 wide receiver in the whole country. He is a guy that if he comes in and picks up the offense and does all of that stuff, he could slot into one of the outside wide receiving roles pretty quick at the same way that Jeremiah Smith did, that Ryan Williams did. That is something that would be possible for a Caleb Cunningham. Caleb Cunningham is potentially the best wide receiver to come out of Mississippi since A.J. Brown, and he might be better talent-wise than A.J. He probably has a little bit more top-end speed than A.J. So we'll see exactly how Caleb Cunningham goes. Devin Harper, I love Devin Harper as a player. Devin Harper was a Louisiana kid that was committed to LSU like all Louisiana kids dream of. He flipped to Ole Miss. I will always respect that move. Shakai Mills-Knight, the running back out of Chattanooga, the Baylor school, 4-star running back, number 136 in the country. He committed to Ole Miss. He's going to be a big-time player. Tyler Lockhart flipped from Mississippi State on signing day as well. And if you want to look at it, we talked about this tomorrow. We give Austin Simmons a ton of credit in the recruitment of some of these players. And that is Tyler Lockhart, Devin Harper, and Caleb Cunningham all were recruited because essentially that touchdown drive that Austin Simmons led. Austin Simmons is the future. He gave a little proof of concept, and the other team players nailed it. Mason Dunn, the 6'3", 6'4" cornerback out of Tupelo, always big to get a player out of Tupelo because that is a heavy Mississippi State area. 175 nationally. He was a heavy flip watch. Alabama threw everything they had. They shot both barrels trying to get Mason Dunn. Mason Dunn held firm. LaDarian Clardy out of Escambia, Florida. Down in Pensacola, that's Emmitt Smith's old high school. Went to Ole Miss as well. Andrew Maddox is on the list. Winston Watkins is a player that committed to Ole Miss today. He is a big-time prototypical slot receiver. We'll talk about that. Keon Young, I got a story to tell you about that. Cortez Thomas is another Mississippi State heavy area kid. Samari Reed is kind of an underrated prospect. He is one of those stockier type wide receivers that can do a lot. He is from, I think, Monarch High School in Coconut Creek, Florida. Really good player, but as the number 4 wide receiver for Ole Miss, that's a big deal. Dante Korg from that area as well, committed. Corey Adams to Talib Graham. Ole Miss did very well with all of this. Major Preston committed. He's from IMG Academy. If you play at IMG Academy, you can play. Ole Miss is still waiting on Tylen Lee. Ole Miss is still waiting on Counter Howes. Those are 2 names that can affect Ole Miss's ranking so far. If you want to look at what Ole Miss is right now, they're sitting at number 15 nationally, 11 4-stars, 1 5-star, 11 3-stars. So with those 2 players that Ole Miss need to get, is going to be the definition of what their class does moving forward. So pretty interesting stuff. We're going to talk about like individual players in the next segment, especially players from the Mississippi State areas of Mississippi, and people that are my age and older. Remember that recruiting those areas have been difficult traditionally for Ole Miss, but this year they were able to get it done a little bit as well. But I do want to let everybody know whenever we come back, we'll break that down. So stick around for that. All right. I want to tell you about FanDuel. FanDuel, it's really good. They're 2.5-point favorite, Georgia, in the SEC championship game as an underdog. We get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. Like I said, Texas is currently a favorite in the SEC championship game. The game is going to be fantastic. I cannot wait for that football game. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game like that, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place those bets. The FanDuel Sportsbook gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so we're going to talk some individual stuff that kind of gets my attention. Now, some of this stuff on the signing classes on tomorrow morning's podcast, so you'll see it there. But I do want to talk about some things that are kind of near and dear to my heart. And we're going to start with Cortez Thomas out of Holmes County Central. He's a dandy dozen player out of Mississippi. He's coming from an area that is heavy Mississippi State. It's so much the point to where at the beginning of this cycle, they just assumed that Mississippi State was going to get him and Mississippi State was going to expend minimal resources to get this player. Mississippi State has got cornerback after cornerback the last 2 times. It's been a little pipeline for Mississippi State. But Cortez Thomas, not only did he pick Ole Miss, there's not much drama in his recruitment. He picked Ole Miss and just kind of stuck with them. And that's something that everybody should be, at least interesting in it, because Ole Miss was able to keep Mason Dunn from Tupelo. Ole Miss was able to sign Cortez Thomas out of Holmes County Community College. And then there's the Tyler Lockhart story out of Winona High School that he flipped on signing day for Mississippi State. Winona is a heavy Mississippi State area as well. That whole area, in fact, I think in Winona is the highway that goes from I-55 to Starkville. Tyler Lockhart has a brother that goes to Mississippi State, and his best friend is on the team. This was a hard pull for somebody like Tyler Lockhart to decide where he was going. And him choosing Ole Miss is no small feat. And then you just talk about the main thing, Caleb Cunningham. He's a 5-star wide receiver. Everybody wanted him. He's from 20 minutes from Starkville. The Mississippi State campus to his house was 20 minutes away. And Mississippi State had no real chance to get him. And Caleb Cunningham said in his press conference today that Mississippi State basically stopped recruiting him when he committed to Alabama. Ole Miss stayed on him. Ole Miss doesn't give that up. But these are Mississippi State areas traditionally that Ole Miss was able to worm into. And them getting there and setting down a relationship is something. Whenever you look at the players that Ole Miss had, like Dylan Alford from Saraland. Okay, he's from Gaucher. Jacoby Hobson from Lake Cormorant. That's a big deal as well. Pipelines are being built for Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is expanding their recruiting base inside the state of Mississippi, and it's happening because Ole Miss is averaging about 10 wins a year right now, and Mississippi State is not. It's not competitive programs right now. This isn't an insult towards Mississippi State. This is just the truth of what's going on. Ole Miss is in a much better spot right now than Mississippi State. Is it going to change? Yeah, probably. It's all cyclical. But for this moment, Mississippi State's in a darkest timeline moment like they were in the 80s with Billy Brewer and the 60s with John Ball. And there's not a lot they can do right now. They've got to figure out how to fix their own program. They do have to figure that out because their program right now is broken. And I talked with Jake Wimberly the week of the Egg Bowl, and he said on defense, he didn't think there was one player on that defense, maybe Isaac Smith, that could start for another SEC team for whatever reason. But Ole Miss is just going. Whenever you look at like Andrew Maddox, he's a 4-star player from Oak Grove High School. His brother is the backup quarterback, but Andrew is a really good defensive lineman. And when you look at the defensive line players that Ole Miss has at the moment, you can see exactly what Ole Miss is thinking. And Pete Golding has been very deliberate of this signing class, building through the spine. It was the center of the defense. It was linebackers. It was safety play. And a lot of his safeties he got, other than Cortez Thomas, was from the state of Florida. And my favorite player in the whole class, mainly because he lives 15 minutes from me, probably, is Keon Young. I saw him play against Winter Haven High School earlier this year. This was a game that I do not know if Winter Haven ended up with positive yards. This was a complete mismatch of a football game. But you could see that Keon Young, they were using him as he needed to be used. Sometimes he'd go up and play linebacker. They would move him around. And the interesting thing is Florida high school football is obviously a big freaking deal, especially with Miami and Tampa and Lakeland and all of these larger cities around. Well, Tampa Bay Tech, that's the name of a high school in the Tampa Bay region, took on Lakeland High School, the Dreadnoughts. My favorite nickname in all of sports is the Lakeland Dreadnoughts. And Tampa Bay Tech had a 5-star wide receiver. And that 5-star wide receiver, let me see what his name is real quick so everybody knows who I'm talking about. It is Dallas Wilson is the 5-star receiver for Tampa Bay Tech. Everybody was ready for this Lakeland Tampa Bay Tech ball game because they wanted to see these two players match up. Dallas Wilson matched up against Keon Young, and Keon Young played cornerback that game. Again, Lakeland moved Keon Young to whatever position was necessary in whichever game. It's smart coaching. It's high school football. It is making your best athlete the shortstop or the quarterback. The same thing that we've seen in high school football. Even a program like Lakeland is doing that. In that game that Keon Young logged up on him, this is the stats that I pulled off of Max Preps. Dallas Young was credited with 2 catches in that game for 6 yards, averaging 3 yards per catch. It looks to me, in my analytical mind, seeing those stats, that Keon Young, who I read an article that said Keon Young was matched up on him the whole game. Keon Young obviously did a good job shutting him down. Now, Lakeland's defense, Lakeland's just good. They just generally are. They're playing for a state championship this weekend. They're just really good. But going up against a 5-star receiver that is 2 spots ahead of Caleb Cunningham on the list and is ranked ahead of Caleb Cunningham on the list, and Keon Young, who is a lower 4-star, likely because of his build, but he's lower that to shut down Dallas Wilson was not nothing. And that was a big deal. And I think the Florida safeties that Ole Miss pulled in, Keon Young and MJ Preston, Major Preston, who plays at IMG Academy, is originally from Virginia. MJ Preston is a smaller guy, but he has a little bit of Mike Hilton in his game. And when I say that, he is undersized, but he has a nose for the ball, and he always seems to be around whatever play is being made. He might not make the play, but he's going to be in position to do it, and he's kind of hyper aggressive. So in that way, he has a little bit of that Mike Hilton gene in him. A really good player, really good player. And finally, I do want to talk about Shakai Mills-Knight. He's a top 100 player. Everybody knows how good he could be. He is a 220, 225-pound running back. He was basically what Ole Miss needed this year with the explosive breakaway ability. I think he's going to get carries as a true freshman, the same that Quinshon Judkins did whenever he was here. I think you have a situation where Shakai Mills-Knight is going to have a major role in this football team in 2025 and beyond. He's originally from Canada. He plays at the Baylor School in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He's three-time MVP of that team. And like I said, he's a top 100 player right now for what's going on. I mean, that's just kind of a breakdown of the players looking at what's happening. Anyway, when we come back, we're going to get into your comments. Remember, if you comment, please put where you're commenting from. We will see you in just a second right after this break. All right, we are back, and we're going to take your comments in there in this instant overreaction of early signing day. And it was nice to see Ole Miss close strong whenever you're my age. There's been a lot of signing days that have just ended up being depressing. It was nice seeing Ole Miss close strong for a change and kind of act like the favorite and the big guy in the room. And they're going to finish with a top 15 recruiting class after they flip potentially Connor Halls, after they land Tylen Lee. If that happens, I think he's signing Friday. So we'll see exactly how that goes as well. Anyway, let's look at the comments of what is going on. Will says, Hotty Toddy, William and Mary from NOLA. Ethan Freeman from Petal, Mississippi. Do you think we make a big push in transfer portal for O-line? That seems to be our most desperate position of need. Ethan, what I think, and this is weird, okay? What I think is Ole Miss needs a right tackle because Austin Simmons is a lefty. The blind side is automatically becoming the right side. I don't think that Ole Miss can assume that Diego Pounds or Jaden Williams can play the right side of the offensive line. And I do not trust Micah Pettis, if he comes back with what he does, to block the blind side. So I do think they need to push for a right tackle in the transfer portal. Let's see. We have Six String from Nashville. Any good targets still available or likely? There's a wide receiver, I think, from Kentucky that might flip and might pop that everybody's thinking about. Let me see what his name is real quick. I think Zach Berry had something about that earlier today, but I will let you know what his name is in just a second. Like I said, he's a wide receiver out of Kentucky. He's also, like, Dane Key hopped into the portal, and that's interesting to me. I'll talk to that in just a second as well. Let's see. Yeah, this is a great pod. Let's see. DeJarian Miller is his name, the wide receiver out of Kentucky. Also, Dane Key and Barry and Brown are both in the transfer portal. It wouldn't be surprised me if both of them ended up at Ole Miss, if honestly. I think Dane Key has the potential in the transfer portal to be what Trey Harris was talent-wise. I don't think his impact-wise might not be the same, but talent-wise, he can do a lot of the same stuff. Willis says Racine Guillory is about to go live as well. I think Racine's going to Utah, by the way. I think he's going to end up in Utah. I think everybody is reporting that. There's a RPM and crystal ball in there. They flipped that around. So whatever happened, I'm not sure, but it appears that Ole Miss and Racine they have broken up. I could be wrong, though. Michael Reed, now that Deuce is signed with Auburn, I think it's probably likely to go to the transfer portal for a quarterback and pad that room to push Austin Simmons? Do we go after Jackson Arnold? No, we don't. You go after a backup quarterback in this one, to where if Austin Simmons gets injured, you trust him to go in, because AJ Maddox is a pretty good backup. You're pretty salty in that room. And with Deuce Knight at Auburn, you're a year away from him potentially in the transfer portal after Hugh Freeze gets fired. So keep that in mind as well. Nobody's lost Deuce. You just lost him for 1 year, essentially. I do not think that Ole Miss is going to go after Jackson Arnold, but it might surprise me. They went after Spencer Sanders. So, I mean, anything's possible. What's our quarterback room look like besides Austin Simmons? AJ Maddox, Andrew's brother, is a backup quarterback, has one of the strongest arms on the team. Walker Howard has not admitted his want to transfer yet. And if he doesn't get into the portal, Ole Miss doesn't need a quarterback at all. Saints fan says, I hope Deion Smith is trying to get eligible. I've heard the rumors that he was. It's in believe it when I see it territory at this point. It just is. Kind of got burned a little bit in the fall, so I believe it when I see it. DB says, Hotty Toddy from Horn Lake, Mississippi. It looks like Simmons is starting to recruit like Dart did. Yes. And tomorrow's podcast in the morning, Austin Simmons had a major role in recruiting all of the wide receivers. He sat back and he saw Jackson Dart, how he built the team last winter. And Austin Simmons is doing a lot of the same stuff. And because of that, you're seeing the fruitfulness, the proof of concept of the Georgia drive made it so much more effective of how good he could be. Everybody talked about him looking like Tua, him playing like Tua with 4 more inches of height. Because of that and people seeing that proof of concept, yeah, the recruiting and everything, the portal is going to be a big deal. And I do want to say, in the bowl game, whichever bowl game that Ole Miss goes to, I've heard rumors, like I said, I'll talk about this on the podcast a little bit tomorrow, but Jackson Dart might play in the bowl game. That has not been ruled out. It's not a slam dunk that he opts out. And I do think that a bowl game is the first game of the 2025 season, not the last game of the 2024 season. So I do hope that if Jackson Dart plays in that bowl game, Austin Simmons at least gets a couple of series in that game, just to see what you have, him and Aiden Williams and all those guys on the field, so that you know what you have going into the transfer portal in January. That's just my opinion. Jack Speed says, hey, Hotty Toddy from Richmond, Virginia. Gavin Lynch says, waiting on Tylen Lee to sign Florida 6A Player of the Year. Yeah, I think his signature day is on Friday. I think he's having a signing party. But he did visit Florida State like the weekend before. So they're putting the full court press on him. They absolutely are. But it's a situation to where his delay in signing was already planned before today happened. Cash the Real Saint says, could Ole Miss play Miami in a bowl game? From Brandon, Mississippi. The rumor that I'm hearing right now from a decent source, but don't take it to the bank or anything like that, is Las Vegas against Colorado. That's the matchup that I'm hearing at the moment. Lane versus Dion is the made for TV thing that ESPN is trying to do. What I'm hearing. Like I said, it might not happen, but that's what I'm hearing. Brian Wesley, starting out strong, build it and they will come. Now, if they can fix whatever it was with the problem with the offense, I think the offense is going to be explosive next year. I think the offense is going to look a little bit different. Just the difference between Jackson Dart and Austin Simmons. It's not a good, bad thing or anything like that. It's just going to look different. And I think that you're going to see Ole Miss pound the intermediate stuff. He's really good at getting the ball out of his hand quickly. He also throws a beautiful deep ball as well. And he's an excellent quarterback. And, man, he's an absolute unicorn as a human being. But it'll be interesting to see exactly how he does. Cash the Real Saint, what would your favorite bowl game we could get and the matchup? I want one of two bowl games. I either want Las Vegas against Colorado because that would just be fantastic, or I want Gator Bowl against Miami. Either one of those I'm happy with. William Bowles, do you think Ole Miss will get a transfer quarterback from in Smyrna, Tennessee? Hey, I used to live in Smyrna. If Walker Howard goes into the portal, Ole Miss will probably sign a backup. It's not going to be a situation where they're trying to sign the replacement. You're not going to see Ole Miss sign a Spencer Sanders, I don't think. You're going to see them get somebody signed that can hold a clipboard, that is interested in playing D1 football, essentially. And if Walker Howard stays, you don't need one. And that's good, because not needing a quarterback, that is a high dollar position that Ole Miss can do better off spending that money in other places. GXCCII from Alberta, Canada. This is all perspective and just thinking ahead. But barring Caden Lee, who do you see starting at wide receiver the first game day? I think a transfer portal wide receiver is going to be out wide, just out of history. I think Caden Lee is going to end up in the slot, and I think Caleb Cunningham is going to be the other wide receiver. I think those are the three. And you have Daquan Wright at tight end with Logan Diggs or Shakai Mills-Knight at running back. I think those are the skill players that are setting up. I think Devin Harper, an offensive line, especially interior offensive line, if he gets there in December and kind of picks up the offense and is ready to go by the beginning of the season, I think you'll see him on the line as well. Keezer Jones from Oxford, Mississippi. I heard somewhere that Deion Smith is committed back to us. I've heard that rumor too. And I heard that he was trying. I know that he's trying to do it, but like I said, I'm in Missouri mode. I'm in show me mode. James York says, Steve, I love your show, but you might have been a year too early on the play for a natty. Seems like we were making a big push to get where we thought we should get last year. Hey, there's a lot of lessons that Ole Miss learned last year. I mean, nobody likes it. It hurts. Whenever you watch the ranking show, that obviously hurts you. But lessons got learned from that. And I think I want to see how Ole Miss attacks this portal window and everything going on December and January, and see how they do it. Once again, Ole Miss not needing a quarterback is a blessing in disguise. And it comes down to needing an edge and a right tackle potentially. Jay Cannon says, do you think Maddox will see a lot of playing time as a freshman? Lumberton. I'm assuming you mean Andrew Maddox. I think Andrew Maddox is going to be similar to what William Eccles was this year. Because you at the defensive line positions, I think you're going to have Jaheim Otis. I think he's going to end up showing up. He is going to be this class's Walter Nolan. And you're going to have Xavion Harris as the two starters. The backups is going to be Will Eccles and Jam Brown. And then the next one will be like the Andrew Maddox and whoever does that. Like maybe Cam Beavers or something like that. Cam Franklin at one end, and I think Ole Miss is going to have Suntaryn Perkins, and they're going to get somebody like Prince Will Amamiellan to be another Jack type point, because Ole Miss found something with their defense this year. Somebody said Brian Wesley. I think Austin Simmons has been recruiting all year. He has. I know that for a fact. I knew that before I knew anything. It was just people needed to see proof of concept. And once the proof of concept was there, all of that work they did ahead of time, it really paid off for him. So Austin's been doing that as well. Couple more questions before I get out of here. Do the kids get NIL deals out of high school? A lot of them. They really do. Charles C. says, Austin Simmons should be a strong reason for stars to want to come. Show them a 3-minute take from Georgia. They ought to be impressed. Yeah, you just look at what signing day did at the wide receiver position. That tells you all you need to know about Austin Simmons. And John Adams says, what part of the team do we need to work on the most after losing our season this past season? The easy answer is the offensive line. With the way they had trouble run blocking, I would really like it if Ole Miss would get a little bit smaller on the offensive line. I'm not talking about major, but maybe go from 360 to 330, something like that. But I think the safety position is the big piece. I think Trey Washington and John Saunders were so good for Ole Miss this season they're going to be difficult to replace, and they just eliminated explosive plays. And if they can eliminate explosive plays like they have been doing, next year, the defense is going to be really good again, because there's a lot of good defensive linemen, and the linebacker rooms. Pete Golding went all in on linebacker this year as well. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. This has been the instant overreaction of the early signing day. Tomorrow we have the SEC squad show as the PM show. On Friday, we'll have Tom Vanderford. On Saturday morning, we're planning on Michael Katz. And whenever that happens, we'll do a live show again on Sunday as we get ready for the transfer portal to open, because with Dane Key, with Barry and Brown, I think visits are already getting set up for Ole Miss. Ole Miss is going to hit the ground running in the portal. We're going to live stream at least 3 times a week in December and January, potentially, to keep up with that as well, and take your comments and kind of help build the community as well. So anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. We will see you later. Hotty Toddy, everyone.